All right. And I'm going to give Mr. James Curtis a call. Wish me luck.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Curtis. This is Alonzo with Bad First Impressions, sir. You are live on the air. How are you doing today?
Fine. How are you?
I'm doing fine, sir. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, sure can.
Well, fantastic, sir. I just want to say, first off, thank you so much for your patience and being on the show. We do have sound effects. You might hear a couple of those. Hopefully, they're not too loud. If they are, I can always turn them down. But and honestly, I'm probably not going to use them too much during the interview. I really want to just pick your brain, sir. First off, I just want to let everybody know that it might just be tuning in. I did post this link into the WC Fields fan group, so thanks everybody out there that might be listening now or in the future. Shout out to you guys. Thank you for supporting WC Fields' memory and all that good stuff. So, Mr. James Curtis is an award-winning author. He has written what probably is considered by most the definitive biography of W.C. Fields, and also Buster Keaton, two of everybody obviously considers classics, classic comedy legends, especially in the classic golden age of Hollywood. And yeah, I'm honestly a little bit nervous, sir. So please forgive any of my overspeak. I know it's kind of hard to do a phone interview, and I've definitely done most of the talking so far. So please, if you'd like to maybe introduce yourself and just how are you doing today so far?
Yeah, fine so far out here. We're not in any rainy conditions, which is nice after a pretty wet year, and so doing well today.
Fantastic. I'm very glad that you could join us today. So, what John Cleese said about the W.C. Fields book, and I'm reading from the back, the definitive book about America's most profound comedian. James Curtis examines all the myths and stereotypes connected with W.C. and comes up with a fascinating, sympathetic, utterly convincing picture of a man who was a generous yet stingy, who was both a dream and a nightmare to work with, who could be warm or distant, who meticulously planned each word and gesture, yet who managed always to ad-lib something hilarious. Field shines throughout, sad, funny, and strangely lovable. And for people that might not know, John Cleese is another one of my huge heroes, and one of the he's like who considered like the brains of Monty Python, like the real star of that show. And
Hmm.
have you had a chance to meet Mr. Cleese?
Oh yeah, sure. And he was he read the book, I think, in manuscript form, if I'm not mistaken. If I remember, this was 25 years ago, of course, but. No, he was a big W.C. Fields fan, still is, and so we had quite a lot of time to talk about him and comedy in general. It was a big help in writing the book.
Oh yeah, no, it's so funny that when I got the biography, so my relationship with Fields is I'm a huge fan of him, but I'm such a
Hmm.
fan, and he has such a short amount of work. I try to just watch one of his movies a year, so it's still new to me. So I still have a lot of his stuff that I haven't seen because I kind of want I don't I, it's my habit to thoroughly absorb somebody as quick as possible, and then when there's nothing left with Fields. So I really I really appreciate. So I do apologize if I'm not as as knowledgeable as maybe a lot of the Fields fans may be listening. I might be saying stupid things, or feel free to correct me, because that's what I really want to hear. Is you are great about taking the idea of Fields and then and really grounding him into who he was, because I think a lot of people love to get lost in the character he created for himself, and I don't know, just kind of just throwing that out there. Sorry.
Well, that was the idea behind the book, that nobody had up to that point treated him as a serious biographical subject, and I wanted to write a book about a true artist and a man, and not a cartoon character. And so it was a very simple, it was an absurdly simple thing to do, and it produced the book that you have.
Yeah, and so as I'm reading it, you have just so many things I've never even heard or even thought to think about W.C. Fields. You start off like from just his great grandparents, and just like before, but by page 11 we haven't even got we just get to Fields by page 11, and by then you kind of understand where he's even where Fields has become before Fields was even an idea. And I think that just gives it already just grounds him right there to people. So some things I wanted to ask with W.C. Fields, what was the biggest surprise you found while researching him that you could think of just offhand?
Well, as much as anything, I was surprised by some of the material I had access to. He was a very dedicated juggler during his early days of performance, and he tried to master a particular trick where he would balance a cane on his foot and then toss the cane up in the air, and it would land. The way it would work, I'm thinking back now, the way it would work was there was a top hat on top of the cane, on the handle of the cane. There was a cigar on on top of the hat, and the idea was that he would balance this cane on one foot and kick it up in the air, and the hat would land on his head, and the cigar could be caught in his mouth. And he worked on that trick for a long time, and I always wondered where it came from, and it turned out that the Library of Congress had an original script from a stage show that Fields noted in print, as a matter of fact, that he saw once. And in there, the trick is described. So he was trying to master a trick he had seen on stage himself. He early on became very concerned that any trick that he attempted or kidded on stage had to be one that he could do legitimately. In other words, if he couldn't master 4 or 5 balls juggling them, then he wouldn't kid that. I remember one time he talked about an act that was in vaudeville called The World's Laziest Juggler. And what this guy did for his act was he would come out on stage and throw things into the air like dishes and the like and just let them crash to the floor. And that was supposed to be funny. And Fields had great contempt for this guy because he really couldn't do what he was pretending to do. So he insisted he had to be able to do a legitimate juggling act before he could do a comedy act, and he worked very hard at it.
Well, it's that's the fascinating thing. So he's very method in that way, where even with the tricks of the camera and stuff, he's like, nah, the character has to be able to do that, which also probably is why his characters are so real and believable, because it is just Fields. And he's just like such a amazing person. And so so I guess I might have had a misconception when I was first coming into Fields, because maybe a lot of people might have this, or maybe I'm one of the few, but maybe as a younger person coming into Fields, I had this misconception that he isn't as celebrated in Hollywood, maybe as a Chaplin or as a Buster Keaton. And for some reason, I had this impression that maybe it was because of how much he kind of fought against the Hollywood system in his age. So it didn't maybe lend itself in the future to his works being kind of portrayed in the way that Chaplin's is, because Chaplin's kind of considered this, almost saint-like character in Hollywood. And I'm always wondering why is Fields never mentioned in these conversations? And it feels like back in the day he always was, but now it's almost like he's being erased.
Well, these guys go through stages where they're more popular or less popular. Authors are like that to some degree as well. And Fields is very big back, when I was in college in the early 1970s. And there were repertory theaters that would show different films every night. And you got a wide variety of things. One night might be a Fellini film, and the next night you'd see the Marx Brothers. Fields went through a phase where he was revived everywhere. He and Humphrey Bogart were the two nonconformists of that period, and they were celebrated for it. And I think to a certain degree, their characters became more ingrained in the culture than their individual films. If you ask somebody back at that time about W.C. Fields, they could probably rattle off a list of characteristics. He had a big nose. He drank a lot. He was a juggler. He was mean to some degree. He was a fraudster, a grifter in a lot of his films, etc. So you could get a quick sketch of him. Jack Benny was another one like that. People became so familiar with his character. He was 39 years old. He was cheap. He drove a Maxwell, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Fields was celebrated more for who he was as a character at that time than as a filmmaker. And one of the things I wanted to do with Fields is show him from the technical side to some degree. And you might notice that on the inside frontispiece of the book, it's a picture of him leaning on a camera on an exterior set. So you've got the sense that he was contemplating seriously how this scene that he's about to do was going to be filmed. And with the Buster Keaton book, I deliberately called it A Filmmaker's Life because I wanted to show as much as anything what Keaton did behind the camera as well as what he did in front of it.
Yeah, no, that's that is fascinating when we talk about W.C. Fields being known more as a character, and it does feel like that's a lot by design. Did you ever feel almost like you're digging up his corpse? Almost when you were kind of digging into things, did you almost feel like he might be mortified to see that people would know so much about him when he seemed like such a purposefully what would you call it?
Private.
Private and calculatedly private. Almost like paranoid.
Well,
might call it.
I think that he liked the idea of the public perceiving him as the character that he played, and not necessarily as a private citizen. He did make the papers occasionally. He was sued a couple of times, and so he'd go to court. But those things would be covered, of course. But when he got the most exposure before the American public, I think that he ever got was when he went on radio in 1937 and went up against Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, and that's where a lot of his image got really imprinted on the popular mind because it was an exchange of insults about 2/3 of the way through a 1-hour radio show, and the audiences got to where they would stay tuned just to hear it. And it was always something or other where Charlie would start out being a respectful young man, and Fields would say something insulting to him, and so he would start out, and they'd start bantering back and forth, and he would make Charlie would make references to his big red nose and his drinking and that sort of thing. And so that's what audiences took away from that. And later on, his character became, let's say, less nuanced a little bit because he was kind of leaning into that. But he'd rather be known by that character than by the real guy that he was, I think. I think he thought, and he was of that generation where they thought, that you keep your private life separate from what you do in public and what you do in your work. And Buster, I think, felt pretty much the same way.
Yeah, there's definitely a certain dignity that doesn't really exist with stars these days. It feels like probably by our own doing, but definitely. So I was kind of looking through the index. So what I also love about this book is, again, this is James Curtis, the author of W.C. Fields' Biography, and it's almost like what you call like an encyclopedia about Fields, because you can really go into the back, and if you're looking at about a certain question you might look for, you can look through the index and then find that that section about it, and it's very in depth. I was looking for stuff about the Bundy Drive boys, and I was in be able to find it right away, but I haven't had a chance to go in depth with the book as I'd like to. Is that how much of that is true with the Weekend at Bernie's story? I'm sure you're familiar with that. It might be rumor, or if it's ever been confirmed that that's what actually happened. I think it was. You say his name a lot. And he's referenced a lot. I forget the
King Fowler,
but Barrymore.
John Barrymore.
Yeah, John Barrymore. But wasn't there was Barrymore died and they got his body for one last hoorah kind of thing?
I don't believe that. I think that's just something that Raoul Walsh made up, and Raoul Walsh told a lot of fanciful stories, and that was just one of them. But no, I don't buy that one at all. The thing that's necessary, I think, to aspire to write a good biography or good history of any kind, I think, is you need a natural skepticism over the various legends that have come out over time. And when I started this book, there were a lot of legends attending the W.C. Fields, and I determined I wasn't going to use any of them unless I could verify them. And some I did verify, like slipping gin to baby Leroy on a movie set.
That shocked me. Yeah, because I listened to your interview with Ronald Fields and the other one. I listened to it twice, and I was shocked because I always thought that was one of the rumors. But then the way that you kind of put it out there, I was like, well, it is kind of the time. They used to put whiskey in kids when they're teething and stuff like that, so it wasn't necessarily like. Wasn't the craziest thing. I'm sure it wasn't also, it probably still looked down upon even then. And another thing you mentioned during that interview was, so the Mae West thing, we said he was very deferential to Mae West. And I was always under the impression that they butted heads a lot and that he wasn't. And you kind of made it sound like he actually knew that Mae West, her star was on the rise and was kind of hot at the time. And he really wanted to do something with her as kind of...
Actually, she was past her vogue at that point.
Really?
And Fields was a very courtly man. Let's remember he was born in 1880, so he came of age about the time of Queen Victoria's reign.
Wow.
And he was descended from an Englishman, his father, and so he was very good with women, and even Mae West, who had a lot of contempt for him, he was very careful with her. He was the sort of guy that when he was at home, for instance, and the black maid would come in to straighten things up or vacuum or whatever she did, he would stand up. And
that's insane.
Yeah, well, no, that's a man of his time, and. The truth of the matter is, with My Little Chickadee, he thought their characters would mesh well, and he ceded top billing to Mae West in order to get a co-writing credit on the film. In actuality, she was not considered nearly as popular an attraction as he was at that point. To give you an example, he was paid $150,000 to make that film. She was paid $50,000.
Wow!
And the studio had an option on a second picture with him, and not with him, but just a second picture with Mae West, and they did not exercise that option. They didn't want her for another film. And My Little Chickadee, she did one more film at Columbia Pictures in 1940, was it two? Called The Heat's On, and she was billed below the title in that one. The first time that had happened in a while. And that was the last film that she made until Myra Breckinridge in the 70s.
So I actually I was wondering, have you ever, it sounds like you know a lot about Mae West. Did you ever think about doing something about Mae West, or did you feel like you kind of already covered it and maybe some of the other stuff?
I think she's been done pretty well by others. The one reason when I take on one of these projects is because I think there's a need for it, that there's a hole that needs to be filled. And with Mae West, I think she's been done a number of times, and she's an interesting character in herself, very egotistical. But I think she knew that she was at a disadvantage in that film, and that's why she disparaged Fields so much, especially after his death later on. Also, her sister was an alcoholic. I think her name was Beverly, and Mae West didn't drink. And I think she had a natural aversion to people like Fields.
That does make sense because and that's interesting. I'll have to look into some of the books about Mae West because saying that I really do feel like this book filled a hole because there's a lot about Fields, but not necessarily what you would want to how to put it. The real story. Because a lot of it is just rumors and stuff like that. So this is really really.
Well, the popular book on Fields for a long time was written by Robert Louis Taylor, who was a writer for the New Yorker, and it was published in 1949. And it was still in print in paperback when I was in college. It's called W.C. Fields' Follies and Fortunes.
I have that one, yeah.
And it's a fun read. It's a funny book. But a lot of it isn't particularly true. I mean, this is one of the problems that I wanted to tackle. What he was doing was putting forth Fields as the character he played on screen, and that's all well or fine as far as what you might be looking for as a reader. But I wanted to know what went on behind the scenes, and I wanted to know how the gears worked. And So that was the reason I took this on, was to take another look at him in a different light.
Yeah, that is a great way of putting it. Almost like if a Homer Simpson had a biography about the character Homer Simpson, and then you actually did it about the guy that did the voice of him.
Yeah.
It's very interesting way of putting it. And so, did you learn anything about yourself while you're researching W.C. Fields' life?
Well, only that I was surprised, I'd have to say, at the number of people I had available to talk to still. I thought when I took on Fields that I was going to be down to maybe a handful of people, and I was mistaken in that. I have a tendency when I start one of these, especially since I'm dealing with an old subject like Keaton or Fields, I'll make a list of people I'd like to talk to, then I'll triage by age. And so up at the top of my priority list on Fields, as I remember, were several Ziegfeld Follies girls that were still alive. One was 101, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And they had worked with him on stage back in the starting in 1915 when he joined the Follies until 1925. And they were all very sharp and very with it. One was still dancing, as a matter of fact. She died at 106.
Wow.
And so I had those people to talk to. I knew of others that had worked behind the scenes with him. Children who worked with him, Jane Withers, for instance. So I was just kind of astonished at the number of people I was able to talk with. And it was very fortunate for me to be able to do so. And I think there's a lot, in fact, people that knew him when he would stay at this resort out in Riverside County, to kids and people who came across him in a very private sense. And there's one story in there, for instance, about this is at Saboba Hot Springs, and he saw the Indian kids one day playing baseball with a stick and a ball of twine that they had put together. They couldn't afford proper equipment at all. And he found the golf pro, whose name was Lubo, and he took a wad of money out of his pocket and put it in Lubo's hand. He said, "Lubo, go out and buy those kids some proper equipment." And he said, "If you tell anybody, I'll cut off your booze," because he would give Lubo a little, one of those little, kind of like what you get on an airplane these days, for him every morning, so he could have a little snort before he got to work. And he said, I'll cut off your booze. So Lubo went out and he got balls and bats and mitts and whatever these kids needed, and those kids had good equipment to play with. And so that's an interesting little vignette about him that you wouldn't get from any other biography.
No, definitely. Yeah, I've never heard that at all, honestly. And so I had a friend that really wanted to ask you this about the ending, because she likes to go to the end of books and see how they end. And she said, did you feel it was important to end the book with Fields' death? And did you feel like that was a natural ending, I guess, for you? His death, I guess?
The ending actually is two parts. There were a lot of headlines that were generated after he died because of his estate. And his widow, he remained married until he died, but they weren't living together. They were estranged. And he had a son. He actually had two sons, as it turned out, but he had one that was legitimate and who had become an attorney. And so he helped his mother gain access to the estate, the Fields fortune, if you want to put it that way. And so the family always had kind of a difficult relationship with him and his memory, because they were reared in a house where his name was never mentioned, although stored at the house were his papers and his artifacts and the like, his juggling equipment in some respects. And so I took it through to the present day or not the present day, but back in the 70s, I think, is when it ends. I'll have to read my own book again sometime. And it's about one of Fields' grandsons, Everett, whom I knew pretty well, and his father had a habit every Christmas of putting flowers on his mother's grave in Culver City. And Everett went with him, and he told me this story, and at the bar at the Magic Castle, as I remember. And he said to his father, "Do you think we should put flowers on your father's grave as well?" And that hadn't occurred to his father. And so he said, "Well, yeah, I think that's a good idea." And so they drove out to Glendale, to Forest Lawn, where W.C. Fields was in a niche in the Great Mausoleum, and it became kind of a reunion between his estranged son and the memory of Mr. Fields. And so I ended the book with him in prayer at the grave. And I did that for a couple of reasons, one of which I wanted to give the reader something that they weren't expecting. And B, I just wanted to kind of underscore the difficulty of not only his own family life, but a lot of people who end up in difficult situations with family relationships, and kind of how Claude Fields bridged that gap finally before he died himself.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a really beautiful way of ending it, because I do, if I remember on the interview correctly, his grandson didn't even realize he was the grandson of Fields until he was about 9 years old and was watching one of the films on TV, which it seems like such a crazy thing to, but I'm sure you know how crazy that family drama can be and how deep those grudges can go. And it's insane. So with Fields, it might sound like a kind of a hack question. Did he have a good relationship with his own family after he got famous? Any of them? I know he he really didn't get along with his dad. I know that they kind of were at ends, because I think there's maybe some abuse. Or I don't know how much of that was exaggerated.
Well, it was a rough childhood, I think, just because it was a rough period in our history, and the social services weren't there that perhaps there are today, the social safety net, if you will, and so and also his father was a drinker and a violent drunk, apparently, and so they didn't get along. Later on, when he became an adult, Fields was, I think, more solicitous toward him. And his father, James Dukenfield, died in 1913 when Fields had become one of the standard acts in vaudeville. So I think he was proud of his son's success, and I think at the end of his life, they were getting along okay. He was really close to his mother, who really kind of looked like him. She had the big nose was the Felton nose, and Kate Felton was her maiden name. And so she died in 1925. But if you look at older pictures of Kate Felton, Kate Dukenfield, I should say, she looks very much like her son, Bill, and or Claude, she always called him. And so I think she was quite influential. In fact, there's a scene in one of his talking short subjects. I think it's the barber shop, and he's sitting on a bench outside his barber shop, and he's commenting to one about the various people as they go by. He greets them very pleasantly, and then as they walk on, he says something as an aside about them to somebody who's sitting next to him, and that was very much the way Kate Felton acted. She would smile and greet people, and then she had something nasty to say about them when they were out of earshot. And he further tips you off at the beginning, because the first shot in that short subject is a banner being reared over the main street of this little town that says "Welcome to Feltonville." So, that's your clue. But yeah, he drew a lot of stuff from life, and in cases like this, they weren't so much anecdotes about things that happened, but about people.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think of W.C. Fields as an artist. because and when it comes to his writing, something that you mentioned that I hadn't really thought about before, but especially because it was vaudeville. How much of what he wrote was his original stuff, and how much of it do you think was probably standards of the time that he kind of made his own with his own character?
A lot of it was original because of his character. I think he was one of those guys, one of those comedians who everything grew out of character, plot, etc. So it wasn't like he was preconceiving a notion of what was going to happen in Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, and then he was going to drop his character into that. It was more a matter of taking a situation and putting that particular character into that situation, and what would develop as a result would be uniquely his. So, you could take Fields, that character of his, and you could even set him. Well, this is a hypothetical. He never did this, but you could say, for instance, put him in a situation where he has to be a department store Santa for a day, and and he has to put children on his lap, etc., who are not always well behaved, and you can just take his character, his movie character, and run with that idea, and it gives you all kinds of ideas of how it would play out. And and occasionally he encountered children in his films. There's that scene in The Bank, Dick, where this little boy has a plastic cap gun that he's toting, and Field sneaks up behind him as the bank guard and grabs hold of him, and his mother pulls him away from him, and he says, "Is that gun loaded?" And she says, "No, but I think you are." and then the kid says, "Look, Ma, this man has a funny nose." And she says, "You mustn't make fun of people's looks," she says. "Besides, you'd like to have a nose like that full of nickels, wouldn't you?"
I love that line, nose full of nickels. It's such a funny way of even thinking about something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like,
But that was like him kicking baby Leroy that time after he had his watch dropped in a vat of molasses, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I just want to let you know, we are at the 30 minutes, so I don't want to take up any more of your time if you have to go somewhere. But if you have any more free time, I'd love to, finish up the conversation. But if we have to,
okay, by all means, go ahead.
I love. No, I don't want to cut it off at all. I just want to I just know that I asked for 30 minutes of your time, and I don't want to impose any longer than you might, because I don't know if you have anything else going on. Because I'd love to keep on talking with you about W.C. Fields as long as you have time for it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm okay until noon time.
Well, fantastic. So it's about 28 minutes till noon.
No, it's 11:32 according. I'm in California, so it's 11:32 my clock right now. So. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And Ted Winnicott, please allow James to continue. Yeah, I'm not trying to cut James off at all, everybody. I just want to make sure that I'm not taking advantage of his awesome disposition. Okay, I'm so sorry, sir, for any interruption on my part. So, yeah, when it comes to when we're talking about when Fields was being really famous in the 70s and bringing it back now, because I do feel, as you're saying, a lot of his stuff is so unique, but I feel like a lot of what his unique stuff is being replayed so much in modern day comedies. I feel like it's very weird that you don't hear people say, "Oh, wow, that's so Fields," like just the Mall Santa thing. You can just see that in your head automatically, like, "Oh, that would be perfect for Fields," but then you think, "Oh, Bad Santa is kind of taking almost a Fields-like character, maybe making it a little more darker." But you could definitely see Fields almost playing that, and almost probably based off of the humor that Fields created with the misanthrope drunk that's actually kind of the con artist also at the end of that movie,
Well, part of it though is Fields was always looking for a clever way of getting something across, and I think there's such a tendency with comedians these days in film, especially. They shoot the first draft. They don't think about going back and refining what they're doing. And Fields, I think, pardon me, Fields, I think, would be appalled by the language that's used these days and is taken for granted. And that doesn't mean he wouldn't have used it himself. But back in the days of the production code, there were a lot of forbidden words, more than George Carlin's 7. And so he would come up with ways of expressing himself similarly with different words. Like, for instance, instead of saying "God damn it," he'd say "Godfrey Daniel," and he could get away with that. The censors wouldn't get him any trouble with it, but the audience understood what he meant. Godfrey Dukenfield, for instance, was an uncle of his, so that's where that came from. But you got the G and the D in there. Instead of "son of a bitch," he said "mother of pearl." But he would say "mother of pearl" in a context where one would normally swear. And so that's a lot more distinctive way to get across that particular attitude, that emotion, than just to say, "Oh, fuck." You know, you've got a situation where someone's thought about this and they're putting it in a delightful new way. And it gets the idea across, and it's in a way that you wouldn't have thought of before, which is one of the great cornerstones of good comedy, I think.
Yeah, that's what I love about Fields is that he's as much as he's a physical comedian, he's also very much a thinking man's comedian. But also the words here just can be funny to a child. You know, the way he says stuff, it can just work as a cartoon character, but he also works as kind of more of a Dickensian character or Mark Twain kind of character. You know, that you'd come across. Yeah, that is very.
Well, I think there's more depth there. You know, in other words, if you're a child and you're looking for something that's funny and amusing, you can be set in front of Fields and you can watch him do physical things like fight with fly paper, or do some juggling, or kick baby Leroy in the butt. On the other hand, if you're an adult and you understand a little bit more from where he's coming from, you can see the subtext in a lot of that, and I think that's where John Cleese was going with his comments about Fields, was that it was Fields worked for audiences on multiple levels. Not all comedians were like that, but Fields definitely was.
Yeah, definitely an all ages comedian, and also a comedian for the ages. You know, his stuff is just as timeless when you watch it. Like I say, it's I almost feel like when I'm watching Field stuff, I'm like, how is anybody getting away with doing just straight up Field stuff? You know what I mean? Without crediting the guy, or people saying, "Oh, well, Fields did it first. Fields did it better." And speaking of modern day comedy, are there any comedians, or maybe a couple comedians? I don't know how often you keep up with comedy this day and age. There's so many of them that maybe reminds you of Fields, or that you think Fields would have hated. He would have been like, that guy.
They're not new, but I think that the Pythons would resonate with Fields. I think he would have appreciated their off-center approach to things, and the various, they didn't all play one character, obviously, although some of them became known more for a certain factor of behavior, I think, like Eric Idle or Cleese. But I think that I think the inventiveness is all part of it, and today it's just tough to think of somebody offhand who would fall into that classification. He was really, Fields, I think, was unique, and it's the same thing with most comedians who have lasted. God knows there were enough comedians back in the 20s and 30s who came and went, and they're completely forgotten today. Wheeler and Woolsey, for example, you can't find anyone under 80 who knows who they are, except maybe a few film fanatics. Personally, I don't think their stuff ages very well, but Fields you can still sit and watch and laugh at. And Buster Keaton, he was working a century ago. And I've introduced a number of his films over the last year and a half since the book came out. And the audiences are great. We've sold out on occasion, and they respond beautifully to his work. It lasts. Chaplin is like that, his best stuff. Laurel and Hardy. Harold Lloyd, if you get a chance to see him, et cetera. But I think the thing that unites them all is they're all unique characters. You won't mistake one for the other. You could look at jazz singers the same way. Nobody sounds like Nat King Cole or June Christie, people like that. It's the same idea. You've got something that's so individualistic that you're putting forth, and nobody can copy it.
So there's something interesting that I notice a lot of books don't cover, and I want to get into yours for this information. So young Fields as the con man with the professor, and how long would you say that he was doing cons? And are there any stories of things that he would do even in his later life that he just never kind of got rid of, like maybe old habits die hard with the conning or with the kind of scamming kind of stuff that he might have picked up as a kid?
I think what he picked up as a kid that followed him through his life was poverty. He was scarred by not having any money and having to live kind of very much a hard-scrabble existence. And when he later became successful, he guarded that money very carefully. And he was known for being a soft touch, but he didn't want anybody to know about it because he didn't want people lining up at his dressing room door. But if someone at Paramount, one of the crew members or someone, would have a misfortune of some sort or a medical emergency or whatever, he would arrange to take care of something like that. But he was always very careful not to let people know who did it. And so I think that followed him through his life. The characters he met very early on, even in childhood, informed his comedy later on. I think the way that played out for him was that was material. And he was able to take bits and pieces of things that, I was told a story one time about Marlon Brando, and he's sitting with some people in a coffee shop, and he's only halfway listening. He's watching other people. And at one point he pointed out to someone something that a woman did, a little physical gesture of some sort in a situation. And he did that because he was going to remember it. And so, people are always building their toolboxes. They're putting new things in it, and they result in delightful discoveries sometimes.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you're saying that Fields, so when Fields was maybe learning cons and stuff like that, he didn't really carry that on with him in the attitude, or just more of just
well, no.
the character.
What he did was he understood how those worked,
yeah.
And so later you can go into a film like You Can't Cheat an Honest Man, where he's selling tickets to the
Amazing
circus, and
scene.
then when he gives somebody, he doubles the bill over, so it looks like there's more money in the change than there is. Things like that. Those are old Carney tricks, and he knew them all intimately. And and he would play characters who could be, let's say, excused to some degree when they do something like that. There was a motivation behind them. And in this case, it was because he was trying to keep the circus running, keep people employed. But you don't think about that at the time. It's more a question of, okay, he's taking these people for a few bucks, and he's using a time-honored method of doing so. And so I think everything that he experienced in youth especially, but later on as well, was a source of comedy for him, that he could take it and use it.
No, very good. It almost reminds me of, I was wondering if, or I was just kind of thinking to myself, I wonder if there's any con artists that were a little annoyed at Fields for making that scene and kind of smartening up the chumps out there, by exposing some of his cons in the movies. Well,
that's how Penn and Teller got famous. Was the same idea. They were kind of revealing how these things work. But I think the best cons depended upon simple human nature. The whole idea that you can't cheat an honest man goes back to the old shell game, the three walnut shells and the pea. And the guy would put the pea, make sure that the mark saw the pea, and then he'd move the shells around, and there'd be a bet placed. And that's how he made his money. And the idea was that anybody who is ripe for a con, in other words, to be victimized by a con man, has a little bit of larceny in them. There's something dishonest about them, and that therefore, well, for instance, on the P situation, the idea was that somehow you would give, if you're working that particular game, you'd let the victim or the intended victim think he saw something that he wasn't supposed to see, like he saw where the P was. It was a mistake, or it was supposedly a mistake. And if he were an honest man, he'd say, you better start that over again because I saw the P. But no, if you have a little larceny in your heart, you're going to say nothing about it whatsoever. And that's when you get sucked in.
Also,
and so you can't cheat an honest man. If you're not honest, you're right for it.
And you probably wouldn't even be at the shell game in the first place because it's probably not a legal thing to do. So even being there at first, you're not being very honest.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a right there. They've already marked you as a person that hey, you know, not and that's such a very interesting point. And so
well, look at today. Look at email today. You know, the kind of junk that comes over in your inbox, or ideally in your junk file, and there are things that are trying to lurk you in with, bring you in with offers of great discounts or free money, or you've just won something, et cetera. And so you're going to click on something that's going to download malware into your computer. The same thing, if you weren't greedy like that, you would just delete those things and move on. It's the people who kind of self-select by responding to that sort of thing that become the suckers.
Yeah, it's very just this carnival mentality that just has never really gone away. It's the probably maybe not the oldest profession, but maybe the second oldest profession. You know, this is the lie. But very interesting. So, is there, or do you have any books that you're working on coming up? Is there anything that's really interesting you right now? Maybe not even books, but another project.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I've got. I'm working on one right now, and the title of it is "Comedy is a Grim Business."
Oh wow!
And it's about the making of a movie called "It's a Mad, 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 Mad World."
Okay. And who made that movie?
A man named Stanley Kramer. It was released 61 years ago, and it was designed to be the greatest comedy of all time, and it very nearly was, amazingly enough. But the idea behind it was that every working comedian in 1962 would be in it, with a few exceptions. And so they had a cast of about 50 to 70 well-known faces. The story itself ran for 3.5 hours. It had an intermission.
Wow.
It was shot in Cinerama, and it's I think one of the more repeated films on TCM these days. You can rent it off Amazon. But the main stars of it are people like Milton Berle and Sid Caesar. Buster Keaton is in it. Jonathan Winters, Edie Adams, Dick Shawn. I'm blanking on some of the names at the moment, but just a absolute amazing assembly of people. Jack Benny is in it. Jerry Lewis is in it.
I'm looking at it right now. Spencer Tracy, Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Buddy Hackett, Ethel Merman, Mickey Rooney, Dick Shawn, Phil Silvers, Terry Thomas, Jonathan Winters, Eddie Adams, Dorothy Provine, just to name a few.
Yeah.
And so, what drew you to that? Because I'm looking at the Wikipedia article right now, and I love because I did see International House. I thought that was such a cool idea, with W.C. Field. So, what was the was it a grim business?
Well, because it was almost an impossible film to get made, and Stanley Kramer said after he was finished with it, if ever a book is written about how this thing was made, it needs to be called Comedy is a Grim Business. And so I thought, perfect title. Thank you very much, Mr. Kramer.
Wow, it really just served that one up for you.
But yeah, he did. But no, it's a film that it just had failure written all over it, because what an audacious idea. And especially making a long comedy. If you go back and look at a lot of the comedies that we revere these days from the classic era. You know, the Laurel and Hardy comedies, for instance, they were 60, 61 minutes long. Even the Marx Brothers films were about 70, maybe 75 minutes long. So trying to make a 3.5-hour comedy that would sustain for 3.5 hours is just beyond the pale, you would think. And it ended up going way over budget. The most expensive comedy ever made up to that point, by far. And essentially no one had ever dared try it before. No one has tried it since. It's unique.
It is very unique. I can only think of some of the Judd Apatow movies for length, but definitely I can't think of anybody that's tried to cram as many. The thing about all the personalities you have to work with all those big stars on one set that probably all want to get the line that they want. That's interesting. I really, I can't wait. How long?
The Three Stooges are in it. Don Knotts.
Jeez.
There are a lot of cameos in it where they just do one scene. And Jim Backus, Mickey Rooney, as you said. I just go blank after a while. I've got so much of this data in my head right now, I can't rattle it off as easily as I should be able to.
Well, what's exciting you about it right now? What's like what you're really digging your teeth into that you're like, oh man, I can't do anything until I figure this out right here?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of problem solving in doing a book like that. Actually, I got familiar with It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World because I was taken to see it on my birthday in 1963. And they built a theater here in Hollywood just for it.
Wow.
It was called the Cinerama Dome. It still exists. It's on Sunset Boulevard. It's closed right now, but it was a geodesic dome, the world's largest geodesic dome, and they created it for what was known as the new Cinerama, which was a single-lens Cinerama, which is really essentially anamorphic, 70 millimeter. And so they decided that they wanted a theater for it, and they built it in 16 weeks in order to have it ready in time for the premiere of the film. The film premiered in early November of 1963. I saw it on November 16th, 1963, and then on November 22nd, as anyone who was alive back then would remember, was the assassination of President John Kennedy.
Oh, wow. So it probably got overshadowed by that, right?
Well, in a sense, yeah, but that's where the social history comes in. I still haven't gotten to that part yet. Was that people emerged from the fog of that assassination, and they wanted to laugh. Mad Mad World became the biggest hit in the country.
Yeah, so it had a budget of $9.4 million and made a box office of $60 million.
No, that wasn't the budget. That's what it cost in 1962 dollars. I think if you'd have to multiply that by 10 or something to bring it up to modern money, but it would have cost $100 million to do it today. But it was budgeted. It was approved at $5 million. And one of Stanley Kramer's great challenges was keeping the lights on and keeping the movie going when the people who were financing it were saying, "Hey, you said you were going to make this for $5 million. It's now $7.5 million." That sort of thing. So to keep the number of balls in the air that he had to do to make this film come off is just astonishing.
No, you're 100% right. I was looking at the conversion rate, like by 10, but pretty much 10.14. So that would be what, 600 million or six? What is that? 6 by?
Well, if you say 9 million, you're getting up to 100 million these days.
Yeah, that's insane. And so then it would be 600 million. Wow, that is. And do you think it still holds up now, or do you think we have to kill another president before we can watch it again?
No. I think it holds up very well. It's a good, big audience film, but it's a type of film. It was back in the days of roadshow attractions, like Lawrence of Arabia and The Sound of Music, where you went, you bought a particular seat to sit in, like you do when you go into a Broadway play. There was an intermission. You had 6-track stereophonic sound, super widescreen, beautiful new theater to see it in. It was really an event to see a film like this, and you can still have that experience. When they reopen the Cinerama Dome, they're doing some remodeling on some of the other theaters that are attached to it right now. But when they reopen it, every year they run the great Cinerama films again in that theater, and one of them is Mad World. And I always try to go when they show it there because it's the closest I can come to stepping back into 1963.
Oh my gosh, I'll have to keep an eye out for that. That does sound like something like a once in a lifetime kind of thing. You don't know how long that's going to be around. You know.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, no,
that's really crazy.
it's I've always thought it to be a fascinating, unique film, and so I wanted to know more about the how it came about, who got the idea, more about the writers and the director, et cetera, et cetera, and so. This is turning into a much longer book than I thought it was going to be. I'm going to have to get it finished and slice it down a bit, but I'm amazed by the amount of material that was out there available.
Yeah, it seems like just the building of the theater alone could be a book. It sounds like quite a feat.
Well, that's just one small aspect of it, though, you know. But and the life it's had since then, because it's never been out of circulation. It's always been available. Although it was also cut quite a bit. They took out 40 minutes, I think, of it. Well, it was still in its roadshow period, but and efforts to restore it have not been successful so far. But it's what remains is still a remarkable experience.
Yeah, I'm putting that on my list. It's a mad world is the movie.
Yeah, 4 mads.
It's really mad. And then
Yeah.
Mr. Curtis, Mr. James Curtis is working on that book. We can't wait till it's on the shelves and we can read all about it's a mad world. And so just to talk about Fields again, like I said, these might be silly questions. So as a biographer with Fields and just trying to are there, as a biographer, are there certain steps that you just kind of, it's part of your workflow? This is what I'm going to start with. I know that you said the triage stuff. Do you always start with the interviews first and then the interviews lead you to the other stuff?
Perishable stuff.
Oh.
The interviews are the perishable thing. So you want to get to the people who you want to talk to as soon as possible. And these days, there aren't a lot left from the periods I tend to work in. I mean, it's amazing me. Mad World is 61 years old now. And therefore, the Keaton films, which I worked with last time, they're 100 years old.
Yeah, so why that period? Why that period do you choose in that?
Well, because when I was a kid, Los Angeles Television had 7 VHF stations, and they ran a mixture of everything. It was before the days like we have now, where every particular subject has its own channel. You have the wheat germ channel these days. Back then, it was a big mix-up of things, and you saw every channel that you watched. You got travel shows, you got cartoons in the afternoon, you got exercise programs, you got old movies, you got syndicated TV stuff. You got everything. It was a grab bag. And a lot of these films were available on television at all hours of the day and night. In fact, they were all-night movies as well, and you'd have card dealers showing them, and you'd sit through 3-minute used car commercials in between segments of the movie. So I got to see a lot of that stuff. I'd stay up until 1 or 2 in the morning watching something, and so it was cheap, easy entertainment. And a lot of the people who made those films that I saw on television were still around, and in a lot of cases still making them, like John Wayne and people like that who were in films in the 30s and 40s, and were still making them. And on television, you could see a lot of people like that. Jack Benny, I saw him do a couple of his TV specials. Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, people like that. I even saw Boris Karloff once do a rehearse a Red Skelton show. So I had that kind of background, and it just made me curious about certain people, certain events, et cetera. And so that's why I dug into it, is because I had that interest and I wanted to know the answers to my questions.
No, I think that's the best answer as any, especially since you definitely grew up on that stuff. It seems, why not do what you're interested in as opposed to write about what you're not.
Yeah.
Well,
and it seems I'm good at it, so I do it for that reason too. But I enjoy what I do.
you're very good at it. When did you decide that you wanted to do biographies, or just did you want to be a biographer?
Back in 1975, I've been doing this for almost 50 years now, and I became interested in a director named James Whale, and became curious about him and wanted to know more about him because there was a local film celebration out here called Filmex in Hollywood and later in Century City, and they did a tribute to James Whale one year. And it was like a film festival where you had new stuff that was in competition, and you had a good, generous amount of older films. And so I got to see a lot of films that you couldn't see on television in those days. And James Whale died mysteriously. And so I sought out people who knew him and asked questions just for the sake of it. And that turned into, I was going to college at the time, and I was working not full-time at that point, but almost. And so I just took it on as something I was personally interested in doing, and it kind of blossomed from there.
Well, very good. I'm glad that you decided to choose W.C. Fields as one of your choices. I really do appreciate that, sir, and I really do appreciate your time. This was Mr. James Curtis, the author of Buster Keaton's biography, A Life in Film, or
Filmmaker's Life.
A Filmmaker's Life, I apologize. And then W.C. Fields, A Biography. This is the award-winning James Curtis. You can find out more information, jamescurtis.net, JamesCurtis.net, James Curtis. He was here for the full hour. I'm going to have this interview up as soon as possible and posted in the W.C. Fields fan group. And in the future, once you get done with your other book, I probably would have had a chance to really dig into W.C. Fields with more Fields questions, and definitely going to get your Buster Keaton book. And I want to read It's a Grim Business, and I want to watch this movie, everybody. It's a mad world. And
you should also, you're a comedian also, you tell me, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm a stand-up comedian.
Yeah. You should read my book on Mort Saul, who was essentially the inventor of modern comedy.
Okay. Mort Saul. Thank you.
He's the guy that put politics in comedy. He started in 1953.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I love learning more about just these super talented, just genius people, and I love just the class and dignity. And I don't know, this really made this really showed what you could do with a little bit of class and a little bit of time and effort and stuff. But so I guess last question I want to WC Fields Group, not fan. All right, well, the chat's getting mad at me. I want to plug it correctly. WC Fields Group. You guys can check that out on Facebook, the Facebook WC Fields Group. They've been super great. They're big fans of James Curtis. I have one last question, and then anything you want to leave us with. But is there any misconceptions besides obviously that Fields was kind of just a drunk who didn't really, kind of just stumbled through his career? Are there any pet peeve misconceptions about W.C. Fields that you just wanted to clarify, or that they kind of annoy you whenever you hear about him getting brought up, I guess, if there's any?
Well, just simply that he was a lot more deliberate in what he did than people seem to think, and that he was one of our great comedic talents. That's the best I can say about him. He was one of the most distinctive personalities in popular arts in the 20th century, and anything that helps perpetuate the memory of his work and gives him exposure is great in my book.
Fantastic, Mr. Curtis. And honestly, I really do thank you for writing the definitive biography, what John Cleese calls the definitive biography of W.C. Fields. You'll learn more than you want to know. The thing is I almost say if you want to know about just the myth and you love the myth, maybe don't read this right away, because it's very clinical, and he really gets down to who Fields was, who what he did, just very clinically, and it's a book that I never thought would exist, and as I'm reading it, you're just like, wow, it's so impressive, Mr. Curtis. Thank you so much for your time. Is there any final words that you want to let the audience know? You have the W.C. Fields fans listening.
I can't think of anything other than, if you haven't read the book, please do so.
Yeah, and buy the book. And if you're ever in San Antonio on any kind of book tour or anything, please reach out. I'd love to see you in person, get this signed, and hope maybe have you in studio for another interview, if you don't mind, sir.
Okay, sure, we'll do.
All right, Mr. Curtis, thank you so much for your patience, sir, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, sir. Thanks you so much.
Okay, my pleasure, Alonzo. Bye now.
Bye, sir. Wow.
Ace.
I don't embarrass myself too much